Today, we're going to dive into a spiritual practice that might just challenge everything you think you know about prayer. It's ancient, it's powerful, and it's all about calling on the Lord.
Okay, so when you picture someone praying, what comes to mind? For most of us, it's a moment of quiet, right? Internal, reflective. But what if that's only half the story? The material we're looking at today asks a really interesting question. Is all prayer actually supposed to be silent?
And this is where it gets really interesting. Because according to this perspective, the answer is a big no. There's this sharp contrast between what we think of as silent prayer and this other practice, calling on the Lord. And as you can see, this is something totally different. It's not internal at all. It's audible. It's described as a cry, a vocal invocation.
So what does that actually look like? What does it mean? Let's break it down in our first section, a different kind of prayer. You know, the origin of the word calling itself gives us a huge clue here. In Hebrew, it literally means to cry out to, and in Greek, it means to invoke a person by name. So the common thread is pretty obvious. This isn't a silent thought. It's something you say out loud. It's an audible act. And this idea has some seriously deep roots. Just look at this line from the prophet Jeremiah. Do not hide your ear at my breathing, at my cry. It's so powerful, right? It connects this audible calling to something as vital and instinctive as taking a breath or literally crying out for help.
And then the prophet Isaiah takes this idea even further. He frames it not just as a cry for help, but as an act of pure joy. For Isaiah, calling is how you draw water with rejoicing from the springs of salvation. It's this active, joyful way to receive spiritual nourishment.
Now, I know this might sound like a new or maybe even an unusual idea, but believe me, its roots go way, way back. Which brings us right to our second section, an ancient living practice. This timeline really puts it all into perspective. I mean, this is not a practice that started last year. We're talking about something that reportedly began with Enosh, way back in the third generation of humanity. And from there, you just see this unbroken chain. It was carried on by patriarchs like Abraham, by saints like David and Elijah, all the way to a fulfillment at Pentecost, and then practiced widely in the early church by people like Stephen and Paul. It's just this continuous thread woven through thousands of years of history. In fact, it was so central to who they were that the early Christians were apparently known as Jesus callers. Just think about that for a second. It wasn't just something they did, it was part of their identity. Their audible calling was a mark that let everyone know who they were.
Okay, so we've covered the what and the when. But what about the why? I mean, what's the actual point of doing this? Let's explore that in Section 3, the purpose of calling.
Well, there are a couple of key purposes laid out. The first one, and probably the most fundamental, is for salvation and rescue. There's this promise that whoever calls upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. But it's also described in really practical ways, as a way to be rescued from distress and trouble, or to find real relief from sorrow and pain.
And it's not just about being rescued from the bad stuff, it's also about receiving the good. This practice is framed as a way to get spiritually enriched, to enjoy the Lord's riches, to receive the Holy Spirit, to experience mercy. It's even described as a way to spiritually eat and drink, or to kind of stir yourself up when you're feeling emotionally or spiritually down.
And just to be clear, this isn't some quiet, subdued thing. Listen to this call to action from Isaiah. Cry out and give a ringing shout, for great in your midst is the Holy One of Israel. The language here is just bursting with exuberant, vocal celebration. Okay, this all sounds really powerful in theory, but how does it actually work in practice? That leads us straight into our fourth section, the way to call. The approach is broken down into 4 simple but pretty profound conditions. First, it has to come from a pure heart. The motivation has to be simple, just to connect with the Lord. Second, with pure lips, which means being mindful of our speech, avoiding negativity. Third, with an open mouth. Now that sounds easy, but it's this physical act of opening yourself up to receive, and finally, with others. This highlights that it can be a really powerful, shared, communal experience, not just something you do alone. And look, this isn't meant to be a one-time thing. Like any meaningful practice, the goal is for it to become a consistent habit. The whole idea is to weave this into your daily routine, to make it a lifelong commitment and a constant active part of your spiritual journey.
So where does all of this leave us? Let's wrap things up with our final section, a call to practice. If there's one core message to take away from all this, it's this. This is a practice that's meant to be experienced, not just a doctrine you read about in a book. The entire point is to move from silent thought to audible invocation, to actually try it and see what happens.
And that leaves us with a really powerful question for our modern world. In a culture that so often prizes quiet meditation and internal reflection, what is the role of the audible, outward voice in faith today? That's a fascinating thought to end on. Thanks for digging into this with me.